Now that our player's jump sprite's working, I want to address something with the direction. And by the way, if your player's jump sprite isn't working, just make sure that you've actually got it assigned, that you've got the right values assigned, and that you're using the correct collider type. If you used something else, you're going to see weird results up until the point where we get to the actually switching of those things. So make sure that everything matches, and there's code always down below to copy if you need to grab that. So let's take a look at what we can do for our player to make them jump and face the right way. Instead of always facing to the right, if I'm going left, I want them to face to the left. Let's stop playing and we're going to open up our player script again. And down here in the update, we're going to do something kind of different and interesting. We're going to refactor and create a new method. I want to have a method here that just deals with the sprite. Right now we have this update method and it's feeling really, really large. This is probably looking like a lot of code to some people, and to me, this is just a little bit more than I like to have in a method. So my update method shouldn't be this long. I'd like to shrink it down. So what we're going to do is add a new method down here at the bottom. And that method is going to update our sprite. But we're going to do that by typing in the bottom of our update method. So right here at the end of line 57, I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to type update sprite, open parentheses, close parentheses, and a semicolon. I'll hit the home key to go to the beginning of the line so that my cursor is right at the beginning of update sprite. Hit Alt Enter and hit generate method. Now this gave me a private void method right below my update method. So if I collapse my update method, you can see it's right here down below, and this is just my own method. This is a method that I've written that's not going to be called by Unity automatically. It's not like onDraw Gizmos, update and awake that are all special Unity messages. Notice that this says Unity message. These are actually methods that are called by Unity from a messaging system that it uses. So update sprite is not. It's a method that I've created myself. And right now, by default, all it does is throw an exception, which really just means put an error message into the log. At least for this use case, that's all it means. It'll drop an error into the log and do pretty much nothing else. So we'll break execution of our program, but that's not really an important part right here based on where it's at. So we want to change this. We don't want it to throw an exception, write an error, or do anything bad. We'll delete that out, and we're going to go into the update method. And instead, we're just going to figure out how we can take this sprite renderer stuff and move it into the update sprite. So what I want is to check to see, well, first what I want to do is take these lines 39 and 44 out. So I'm going to take line 39, I'm going to cut it with Control X, and then I'm going to paste it down here into line 64. I'm going to do the same with line 44, cut it with Control X, and paste it down here onto line 65. I know I want this stuff to happen here. Right now, it doesn't make any sense. It's going to set it to the first sprite and immediately set it to the second sprite. We'll work on the logic for that in a moment. The next thing I want to do is get rid of these braces, because now I'm only doing one thing. I'm going to get rid of these extra lines here to make it more obvious and add a space, but I'm only doing one thing in my if and one thing in the else. So I don't need these braces. They're just making my code a little bit bigger. In fact, they're making it quite a bit bigger. It's making something that could be 4 lines into 8 lines. So let's delete it with Shift Delete. Go down to the closing brace there, Shift Delete. Got to make sure that I get the closing brace. If I have messed up braces, if I just delete one here, it's going to break everything. Look, my update now thinks that this is the end of the update and my code is all ruined. But if I Shift Delete and get rid of that extra extraneous closing brace, everything will work better. All right, so our collider check is now shrunk back down, got rid of the braces, and our update sprite check, or our update sprite method is ready to be worked on some more. So what do we want to do in here? Well, if we're jumping or if we're grounded, we want to use the default sprite. So we can just say if is grounded. Look at that, it auto-completed for us. And then we'll go down to the next line on line 62 and say else, or 61. So now we've got that same logic recreated right here in our update sprite, and this is starting to shrink down. It's getting a little bit smaller and we're not having to add more to it. Let's hit the line 60 and hit the tab here to just indent that, and hit the tab here to indent that as well. Now, it's important to note that indentation and spacing doesn't really matter in C#. It's not like some other programming languages where it's very important, but it is important for your sanity and for being able to understand and read the code. So I want to make sure that my indentation is always pretty good, or perfect, ideally. You don't want to have it wild and crazy like this, and you got this thing over here. That's way, way, way harder to read. And you can hold down Control K and then hold down Control and hit D and have it automatically format the entire document for you to fix the formatting up. So if you have a hard time with that, hold Control, hit K, D while you're still holding Control. It'll fix that all up. Now our update sprite method works, and we've refactored and moved that code out, but we still haven't adjusted the sprite to face the correct direction. Now to change the direction, we need to use that flip X property. Let's go back to Unity and take a real quick look at it. Remember, we've got the flip X that switches the sprites, and it's kind of not showing us much because our front sprite doesn't have much of a difference, but you can see the dots are switching which side they're on. Our jump sprite, though, will be totally different. So we're going to want to modify that flip X. Now let's go down to the bottom of our update sprite. And here, what we want to do is flip the sprite if they're moving off to the left. So if they're moving to the left, that means that the horizontal value is something negative. Remember, 0 is if we're not touching it at all. To the left is negative point whatever to -1, and to the right is positive all the way up to +1. So we want to check to see if the input is going negative, and if so, we want to flip the sprite. Otherwise, we want to, maybe if the input's positive, we want to make sure that it's set to the right. So how are we going to do that? Well, we could reread this input here, this axis stuff, or we could just kind of hold on to it, which I think is probably a better idea. We just store this horizontal as a variable instead of trying to read it again. So to do that, we're going to delete this var keyword in front of horizontal, and we're going to turn this into a field. So I'll hit Alt-Enter, and we'll hit Generate Field. That's going to give us a field up top. We'll hit F12, and remember that in the way that I like to make my fields, I like to add an underscore to the front of it, and this one doesn't have an underscore, so I'm actually going to use a hotkey here, Control R, which is the same key twice. Hit Control R twice, so Control and hit R 2 times. It'll bring up the rename. F2 might be your hotkey as well, or you can right-click and find the rename if it's something different. But I'm in the rename mode. I'm going to hit Home and go add an underscore right to the beginning of it. If I hit Enter now, it's going to rename all instances of that horizontal that were down here that didn't have an underscore to have an underscore. If that didn't work for you, you can always go through and manually do that. Just adjust each one. Now, what are we doing? We're setting the horizontal value right here. We're logging it out, and then we're using it here in the in our velocity setting. And now this horizontal is going to have our speed calculation in there, and that's totally fine with me. It doesn't matter. We just want to check if it's greater than 0 or less than 0. So we're going to go down to our update sprite method and add our if statement. We'll say if, and we want to check horizontal. If it's greater than 0, so if we're pushing to the right, then our sprite renderer, let's go to a new line, sprite renderer dot flip X should be equal to false. We don't want it to be flipped if we're pushing to the right. Now, the alternative is that we're pushing to the left. So we'll say else, but we don't want to just say else. We want to say else if horizontal is less than 0. Then sprite renderer dot flip X is equal to true. Look at that, it auto completed for me. Now, why can't we just say else? The reason for that is if we let go and we're not pushing anything, horizontal would be 0. And we don't want to have a default direction. If we did that with just the else, it would just instantly flip to the left as soon as we weren't pushing any direction. That's not the behavior we want. We want to face the last direction that I was pressing. So let's save with Control S, get rid of the little star there. We'll take a look at the entire script one more time. So there it is. We've got everything here. We've got our update sprite method. Update sprite's being called right here at the end of the update method. And we'll go back into Unity and try it out. So now when I jump, we should be able to see that I'm jumping to the left or to the right, at least slightly more visually than we were able to before. And this is going to work for our moving and all of our other sprites that come along after this. So once we start running, so there we go. I can go left and right. Look at that. It's looking pretty good. So let's stop playing, go back into plastic, make sure that we've saved our scene, and say that we've added added sprite directions. Added sprite direction based on movement inputs. And we'll check in our change.